Okay. Okay, Angela, thank you so much for this invitation. This talk will address the problem of the VSM paradigm today. So with respect to the abstract, I sent you there's some modification. I read The Brain of the Firm now, and I'm trying to read, what does it mean to read it now? The role of the effector. Angela, I will ask you to go on with that. So I start with the quote, with two wonderful quotes by Beer. And my problem is that I will try to develop is how to connect the new paradigm and the old paradigm concerning our habit of a generation or a habit that started in the 70s. We used to think that the new could be superimposed to the old. And this, after so many years, appears not to work. So I have these two quotes. Adventurous ideas soon become constrained by the absurd fact that their proponents cannot think them through to a proper conclusion, it would seem, and old ideas prevail. It seems as if between the 70s and now, this is exactly what has happened. That is, given the impossibility for a new idea to reach a pragmatic conclusion, the old ideas prevail. But nonetheless, people embrace adventurous ideas because they appear liberating. This instinct of using liberating ideas, it cannot be suppressed, of course. Can we go to the next? So these are the problems that I will address, and to which I don't have a clear solutions, of course. So after 50 years of Beer's proposal, of causalistic thinking is still strong. We have this mindset that claims to attach a cause to an effect. The viable systems are in place, as Beer said, but they are pathological. I like this definition that he gives. Management is replacing government. So having the model of management may work today exactly because of the poverty of political governments all around the world. But they work through these giants of the digital, of course, the digital power being in the hands of a few private owners. A problem that they address is also the algedonic signals, because they are now in place thanks to the socials. So we are at real time. We are capable of detecting algedonic signals, that is the amount of pain and pleasure in real time, but they are manipulated. These signals are manipulated and do not, or this is my question, are they really correspond to what the people need? Final problem, once that ideologies are over and ideas seem to be taken over by those private owners of the digital powers, and urgent contingent decisions are needed, how to translate this variable system model today. The next, please. So this is what I call causalism. Causalism, or linear causality, is the old idea. Circular causality is the new idea. Probably this is clear for you. In any case, as Beer says, according to this mindset, which I call old, the social system is stable. They believe in, we believe in stability, and we take it as a matter of fact, but something disturbs it in a way that we need to reestablish the previous stability. An example that he brings is that a digital thermometer that should be placed in one room to prevent fire in the building. So this is the cause-effect relationship. If we place a device, we can control a certain effect. a certain cause to avoid a certain effect. According to circular causality, instability is a matter of fact. Stability simply doesn't exist. And therefore, what is that this mindset tries to detect? It tries to measure the natural tendency of any system to depart from a state of equilibrium. So the equilibrium is a kind of unreachable ideal, and all the effort is to keep the instability level in a way that is affordable. The example that Beer brings is a digital device that detects a disturbance like a fire and leaves the building on wheels. I find it wonderful because it is creative, pragmatic, and it is a way to urgently respond to a problem rather than looking for the retrieval of a previous stability. As Bia said, we do not need to know in advance the causes of the disturbance, which of course goes hand in hand with this idea of his idea of the excessively complex systems. Instead of knowing, we need to act. I find this very important today because we keep trying, we keep making, we who, the scholars, the intelligentsia, or the governments try to understand the causes, try to understand the reasons why something doesn't work. But this implies a very slow process, and we don't have any time to wait. Next. So very quickly, so causal thinking, I call it tribal thinking, which has been updated by the ideology. Of course, in the 70s, we were ideological intellectuals or students, and we said that the enemy is wrong because we believed in some radical universal values that should have been superimposed to the old morbid system. But this is tribal because it has its roots in the idea that my tribe is right, the enemy tribe is wrong. In both cases, there is an external cause of which the effect is the passive victim. The effect is inert. I like to make this digression. In Greek, there are two terms for cause. One is aitia, which is curiously has two meanings, cause and guilt. So the cause is also considered to be the guilt, the fault of someone or something. Another is kairos, which means the occasion, the chance, the opportunity to be taken. Next. So this is the narrative of linear causality. The causes are external. What do? They isolate phenomena to trace back their causes. So describing a structure or a stable system protects from changes. And the fact that we have a stable structure also means a resistance to change the structure. This idea of isolating phenomena comes from science, of course. And this is common to Wiener and Beer explicitly. So what is actually linear causality mindset? It is a pathological attenuation of variety. That is, the stability of the structure guarantees that any variety can be in check, as if the variety were completely detectable and in control. So this is how Beer describes it. The firm considers the boss plus subordinates. So an infinite amount of monads are reduced in their variety to subordinates. So there is a hierarchical relationship between a cause effect, the boss, subordinates. Okay, the next. The opposite narrative of circular causality, according to this paradigm, the cause is internal because it is generated by the effect itself. This is why the effect is called the effector. because it is not passive, but it is retroactive, creative, generates some device, some new idea to modify the amount of instability that jeopardizes the survival of the system. And this happens through little undetectable modification. The modifications of the structure must be little, exactly because the structure cannot be completely overthrown. This reminds me of Raymond Rouillère that says that the structure has always some kind of little change. It must change un peu. And this is interesting. So the stability for the circular causality is not in the past, something to be defended, but it is in the future, something to be conquered. And of course, it's not never completely to be conquered. Causality is there, of course, but it is not aimed at finding a complete control on the effect, because we know that the effect is contingent. The contingency is not detectable fully as Beer considers. So the internal rules are actually the only place in which an angedonic control can be active in terms of active or retroactive or creative effector versus the external and universal causes that are not contingent. So instability, instead of being the opposite of stability, is the very source of exploration. There's no need to know the causes, and this is can also be called the black box ontology, reminding of Andrew. Next. This is just an association between what we may call the black box in two different paradigms that are, I find, quite analogical. You may correct me, because it's... So in Beer, the brain of the firm, there's this interesting graph that shows the anastomotic reticulum in which the input is followed. The input triggers an enormous amount of possible reactions that goes to the output, but the output goes back to the input to modify it. This is why the reticulum is such, and it's not anything that can be completely detectable, because once that the output is given, there's another form of instability that requires to go back to the input, and it is the very output that is the effector that goes back to the input, which corresponds to the back propagation of the back box in connectionism and the neural nets, which happened in 10 or 20 years after Beer wrote. So we have an output, we have an input, we have an indefinite hidden units that try to make sense of what's happening, and an output is the result. But the result is constantly to be modified, and little modifications, again, are what guarantee the possibility to address the contingency of unpredictable facts in nature. Nature is never a structure. Nature is not a structure. So I tried to make a comparison between the 5 principles of the VS model with the principles, or with the mechanics, with the dynamics of the neural networks. So there's something hidden. The hidden layer of the neural networks might correspond to the constant adaptation in a exceedingly complex system. In both cases, we have some part of action before knowledge. This is why I make this comparison. Can we go on? So if we try to apply the one to the other, well, this is just a clarification. There's no way to say from which source an output came. We do not master the environment. The solutions that we explore are tentative, are experimental. They happen before knowing the causes. the system does the least necessary to modify the structure. This is interesting today, I think, exactly because doing more than the least necessary makes the system undergo a big risk. The risk is that the whole system crashes. It avoids BSS, hunting or ataxia. Hunting is when the robot Elsie made by Grey Walter, cannot find its way ahead exactly because of the oscillation that is given by the same amount of light being in one side or the other side. Ataxia is exactly what happens in the brain when the oscillation becomes too wide and the solution cannot be found. Was probably considered to be similar to Parkinson, for instance. The next. So this is the problem. The viable systems are in place, BSS, but they are pathological. I found this passage very interesting. He tells his encounter with Varela and Maturana. He says they don't agree with one another because, of course, according to Varela and Maturana, who have a biological model of a systemic relationship, but do not believe that a society can be autopoietic, can be a viable system. But he responds to them saying such a social system is necessarily autopoietic, exactly because it is what tries to survive and produce itself. Whatever produces itself is autopoietic, not only the living. Of course, with a difference, because the autopoietic has a goal, the goal of survival. The social doesn't have a goal. It is not itself teleological. So systems are not individually autopoietic, he says, because they don't have a status on their own right. This is interesting. According to him, in the various level of the viable system, only the first level, that is the level of operations, is autopoietic because it contains operations that face directly the environment. This is very interesting because it made me think, what does it mean to be autopoietic? I think that he has this discrepancy with the biological paradigm, because he thinks that the pathological systems, the pathological social system, are actually heteropoietic because they are causalistic. The actual viable systems that survive, that exist somehow, and they work, but somehow leave some doubt on democracy, exactly because of their being heteropoietic. So what does it mean to be autopoietic again? Next. So what does it mean by pathological? Does it mean heteropoietic? Are we facing viable systems that can be non-pathological? Of course we do, because we believe that not any control must be top-down. But at the same time, we have to face the fact that these systems that are in place, with which we have to constantly cope with, are pathological. So even in these pathological systems, effectors do work, but he says that their potentiality remains latent, their capability remains latent. And this is what makes the urge to change these systems. So there's an insufficient variety management in democracies, and this is one of what we call democracy is a pathological system, because we have formation of parties, it says elections, but once that the presidential office takes over, again, they bring the illusion of stability and the illusion of direct communication. So the problem is, should we step out of the pathological system? Should we cope with them directly? Next. So management is replacing the government. This is what we call our governors. We call them influencers, but because exactly they use the digital weapons, the digital instruments, what is called the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, updated with the metaverse, Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon. So the cybernet, the invisible end of the market and information today is not a matter of, this is obvious, not of putting a new product in the market, but using information as a production. Interesting prophetic view of beer, the cybernetics of democracy are already in place, regardless of a more advanced technology, or thanks to it, which might ameliorate rather than exacerbate the problem. But is it true? The existing checks and balances are new in process of dislocation through a new generation of electronic intervention in society communication. Great intuition, that is, the electronic intervention is going to change the cybernetics of democracy, but in a way that is not ameliorating, I would say. This is why variety amplifiers are needed to go back to the people's voice. But where's the people's voice today? Next. And this is my problem. This is my problem. Where's the people today? This yellow line. Yellow line argues the fact that the voice of the people can be in direct algedonic contact with the government or management. Why? Because instead of having a direct communication, which is an illusion, it passes necessarily through the social media and these digital giants, which, of course, is not just a TV. Okay, Beer couldn't imagine that it's not just a TV. Okay, next. So the algedonic signals are in place, but again, pathologically, because we do not have any voice in having, not any voice, we do not have any, how can I say, authentic way to express what we like and what we dislike, because we are already nudged. I've already ever nudged to do something or to like something rather than something else. Maybe this is obvious to you. So as Beer says, Ashby's laws of requisite variety does not work in cases of traffic, national economy, hierarchical firms, but I would say that today all the systems are more like that than other ways. So what is the risk? The risk is to take as algedonic signals the nudging, the inability, the fear of being identified, loss of freedom. I'm quoting, this is also by Beer. So according to the old idea, we have to fix what doesn't work. We have to avoid error. And people in control claim to find causes of change again and to control proliferation. The new idea, these systems should learn to adapt, not to put too much didactism, what he calls a didactism, not to be too confident in teaching, in knowing what to do. I like when he says, thinking people feel uneasy because they think that the world is stable. Again, this maybe I took it from an interview. I think this is especially urgent today when intellectuals, that is thinking people, still have this old idea that the world is stable and should be retrieved in its stability, which has never been the case. Next. So I use an example of a current wicked problem or general problem, pathological, yes, that is the sugar in processed food. After the war, introducing sugar in supermarkets saved lives because it was cheap. We know that the brain needs sugar. Giving sugar to the masses was a great advancement, but it appears to be unhealthy. So that the brain actually may suffer from the excessive use of sugar. And of course, the productivity, profit, private enterprises resist any change because they like to have an enormous consumerism about that. In Italy, a new law about sugar was didn't pass, okay, was failed. Whereas I think in Europe it is, they try to change it. The health system fosters change, of course, because it spends more money when sugar is too much used. But the unions even can resist change because taking out sugar from products may cause unemployment. So again, back to beer, each of these factors is unable to solve the problem because they consider the effects depending on their convenience and not the effectors. So sugar in the brain is a good effect, but as an effector causes illnesses. Next is just the graph showing this complexity, of course, the complexity of it. So the Cold War was responsible for the implementation of supermarkets, especially in America. They started in the United States as a response to the Soviet Union redistribution. This caused the population growth in collaboration with science, but science itself warns that there must be a decrease of sugar. The health systems, the unions, the risk of unemployment. So the ambiguous here role of the workers. In Italy, we have a big factory of weapons, of arms, and we are the third exporters of arms in the world, and workers don't want to give it up because it's their survival. The next. So just as a conclusion, how can we end? Now, after the end of ideologies and ideals, what to do? How can we foster contingent decisions in a situation of black box, in a situation of exceedingly excessive systems? I found three examples in three different times. Sorry, I have the best. Three different examples in three different times. The first is Yves Guyot, who in early 19th century, 20th century, was already aware of the risk of deforestation, and one of the first public political statement of environmentalism. Stafford Beard, of course, in the 70s. I use just one among many examples. Kathleen Hales in 2025. But the fact that this awareness has taken so long, such a long time, and the urgency has lasted more than 1 century, makes us think that there must be something wrong in the very notion of urgency. Why can't we find a viable system that works? Next. This is Guyot, who on a radio broadcast, one of the first, warned against deforestation. L'homme change son milieu, man change its environment. It was delivered at the Société Anthropologique de Paris. So again, this may be due to an ideology that is on an ideal, the ideal of stability, as if before the deforestation there's stability, but it cannot be stability if people needed wood. Okay? So there's no stability. The second, of course, this is what we are talking about. The next slide. Of course, I can't. This is obvious. It's interesting how he involves so many indefinite number of systems, subsystems, songs, radio. I like that. Booklets, people, film workers. cyber scene energy, of course. But today, how can we rely on this myriad of cultural expressions? This is another. The next is Hales, who just wrote this book, published this book, in which he opposes the liberal paradigm with the cognitive assemblages paradigm, in which he imagines a leaderless sphere of action that involves all the possible systems, not all of them, of course, that must be involved in any kind of decisions. Next. So where to find the stuff for beer now? This is just a suggestion of a few references that might update or that might be updated themselves by beer. For instance, when Niccolò Machiavelli introduced the realpolitik, that is, the real politician is the one who needs to look for and find immediacy of action, anticipation of the next move, without knowing Livy or Cicero. Hannah Arendt, of course, when she talks about civil disobedience replacing violent revolution, that, of course, she described in the Origins of Totalitarianism. Karl Popper, piecemeal engineering, again, this step-by-step attempt to change things, again, these little modifications that are safe because they can go back or they can be modified step-by-step without risking the crash, the collapse of the whole system. Catherine Hayes, self-organization of cognitive assemblages. Niklas Luhmann, the double contingency, that is the worry, the concern with time. Beer talks about, given the real-time algorithmic signals, the risk is that the politicians take too much time to change things. So this time delay may be a problem, this time lapse. Andrew Pickering, Acting with the World, that is his classical example of Colorado River, the erosion in Japan, which is very simple and very nice. That is how the Japanese intervene exclusively when it is necessary. Angela Espinosa, I quote from her idea of participatory budgeting, apart from her examples. Participatory budgeting is very interesting. That is, make the system feel that we are all spending the money for the result. We don't have this idea that we are spending our taxes for good reasons. Audrey Tang, I am particularly curious about Audrey Tang, is a young Ministry of Digital, or ex-former Ministry of Digital in Taiwan, wrote a book in which he talks about troll hugging. What he calls troll hugging is taking the little good in the enemy and trying to catch from there the way to find a conclusion of a debate, for instance, or reverse mentoring, absolutely important today because this implements this in his teaching, that is the younger mentors the older. So there's a kind of a chain of younger people mentoring the older, which is absolutely important because of the enormous generation gap today between the young generation. When we say generation today, we say 5 years. For every 5 years, there seems to be a new generation. Next, and I think last, so again, how to connect the old and the new. There's a kind of visions of the future. This is a kind of a paradox. That is, the visionaries today are not the revolutionary, are not the Karl Marx or Lenin, but they are Musk, Peter Thiel, Putin, because they rely on certain philosophies, quite ambiguous, of course, Musk is called long-termism, cosmism, which was a Russian ideal of going to the cosmos and defy death. Peter Thiel apocalyptic view and extreme libertarianism against any intervention of the state, which sounds very American, of course. Trump wants Christianity, ambiguous Christianity. And this is just something that I heard, that I listened to recently. OpenAI and iPhone made an agreement about a future product that does not exist. They don't say what it is. They just talk about it. They call it IO. Doesn't matter what it is. It's not a product. What matters to them is this vision of the future. But again, I think that these visions of the future in these conditions of global interconnection may work as a tribal belief mechanism. People are attracted, are fascinated by that. So polarization is this idea that excludes the pathological, excluding the, as if there could be a non-pathological viable system. As Beer says, the firm, after all, works. Nature works, and nature is not a perfect viable system. It's the biggest viable system possible, and it works. But of course, the human cannot be just renounce its role. However, it must accept that its role is not central. I remember Rodrigo Albornoz, when I listened to his talk, he said that there is no goal, because I said, but what about the goal? How to reach a goal if we are in such a difficult situation? And he said there is no general goal. Actually, it's true. We do not act out of an ideology, an idea of a general goal. But what does goal mean if we have to intervene against the drift, against the dangers of this current situation, political situation? The next. Okay, so just these are just a synthesis. Who are the actual effectors today? Cognitive assemblages, infrastructures, even establishments, AI or nature itself. Beer makes a distinction between the heuristic and the algorithmic cognition. And he says that the algorithm is going to become stronger and stronger. The heuristic is the uncertain explorative character of the human, but both must collaborate. Immediacy of action against vision of the future, or made together with these visionaries. I don't know what to think. Style, take the world as it is instead of considering a perfect world or a stable world. For hugging, reverse mentoring, constant mediation in the making. Should we or can we mediate between the big pathological systems and possible small, more healthy, viable systems? Perceiving forces that are still germinating, and this is the meaning of reverse mentoring. Maybe we are not, maybe the young people should have a bigger, a wider voice in telling us what the perceiving forces that are still germinating. Next, and I think last, okay, so we have this my imagining that we should have a kind of collaboration between the conservatives and the progressive, which have exchanged places, because in the 20th century, the progressive were utopianists, the conservatives were the liberal politics. In the 21st century, it seems that the conservatives are visionaries because they have the privilege to have these visions of the future, and the progressive call for an immediate action. Last, I'd like to make an example, last slide, Well, these are the problem. Of course, we're at the centers of command today. When to do the clocking off, this I take from a quote from Beer, that is, at which point should we stop the flow of information and make a decision? Because the problem is who makes the decision by stopping the flow of information. Next and last, I like to use this example that is a viable system, hybrid system that exists here in the periphery of Rome, that is called Lake Exnia Viscosa. In this place, during fascism, there was a factory, an experimental factory of viscosa, in which women had their kindergarten, and then it became just a barren land for a while, until a private entrepreneur wanted to make a parking place. Can you see still the scaffolding? These are the scaffolding of a parking place. By making this parking place, it hit a local underground water, underground river, and the river filled the surface, making a new lake. So the enterprise was stopped. We have now a local flora and fauna that children can play in, migrants can do, they can have their beehives. And so this is the kind of collaboration I imagine between the state, the worker, the enterprise, which failed actually, groundwater, rivers, or nature. So it sounds like a very Pickering style example. Of course, it's just an example, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Brunella. Very, very extraordinary, very interesting. It's so rich what you are taking to us that it's going to be very difficult to discuss it. And
well, maybe it was not
to get to
clear,
conclude.
but it was very explorative. It's not that I'm very heuristic.
No, fascinating, really fascinating. So I will have 1,000 questions, but I would like others to start. Who would like to start or commenting?
Sorry. Paul. Hi, Paul.
Too many questions, I think, is the right thought. I'm a little out of my depth here, but I'll just make a couple of quick comments. I'm getting the sense that Beer was ahead of the wicked curve, and that he had ways of thinking about complex problems, complex adaptive systems, he called them, of course, but those that are beyond direct solution and everything you changes everything else. I have a problem with the idea of no goal, although you said no general goal. I think it's the opposite. I think I don't have a specific goal, but my general goal at the highest level is to survive, to thrive, and so on and so forth. So I don't quite understand that. Maybe I can turn that into a question. What did they mean by no general goal?
What do I mean?
What do you mean, or what is it that we take from others who feel that way?
No, it's no general goal. I think Beer himself says that nature does not have a goal. Nature is not one system. It's a super system, super organism made of many living organism. Is it living itself? Even if it is living, because we have Margulis, other theories, doesn't have a goal. This is what I mean by general goal. If general goal means survival, survival is in place. Some die and some don't. But we can't flatten the idea of a viable system to nature, because nature works, but at the expenses of some part of the world, the people, and with the advantages of other part of the people. This is what I mean by general goal. Of course, this conversation has a goal, but there's also a heterocracy of heterogenesis of goals. If you have yours and mine, it's not that our goals are really the same. Is what I mean.
Fair enough. That's helpful.
And maybe a problem Maybe not a problem, because according to causalistic thinking, deterministic thinking, we should have the same goal. That is the cause. The cause is turned into a law of nature, a law of history, and we must accept it. This is why I say no general goal.
Wonderful. That's very helpful. And I do want to acknowledge the sweep that you've done here, as Angela referred to a moment ago. It's really quite, it takes my breath away, because there are so many possible moments in which to make a comment. I won't go on too long, but I will complain that the Google founders, Larry and Sergey, has distorted the universe by calling what they were doing algorithms instead of heuristics. From the point of view of the goal, they're really heuristics. And that simple power move on their part has ruined us, those of us particularly who like to write code and prefer to think of them as non-controlling heuristics for social interaction, rather than a power move by the platform companies to take all the money away. Reverse mentoring is interesting as well. I've been working here at Carnegie Mellon for a while, not on reverse mentoring, but collaboration between a so-called student scholar and a so-called in-world practitioner. And the temptation is for the practitioners to say, read my 50-page PDF. This is a typical way I talk about systems people wanting to help students. And yet it should be a collaborative conversation between that so-called younger generation and the generations who have established themselves in practice in the world. But just an appreciation, a few notes among many possible things to pick out. But thank you very much for
Thank you.
There's a lot to discuss.
Brunella, before we go with more questions, do you mind if I share your PowerPoint in the chat so that people can have a look? Because it's so rich that I think that, I don't know, the others, I would like to go back to some of the slides to comment. So I'll just put it in the chat if in case someone else want to read, okay? Want to see it. Let me see. But come on. Who else would like to comment? Andy.
Yeah, it's just a little point. On your slide, Brunella, when you were talking about democracy, when you mentioned when my work appeared, right? I suddenly felt interesting in it. You had me under the heading of democracy, but my book is about performative relations between humans and non-humans, people and things. How do we get on with the land, with ecosystems, with spirits and things like that? This kind of dynamic performative relations with an environment is certainly part of the VSM, isn't it? I mean, but I personally don't connect it with democracy. Well, what do you think?
You don't see connection between democracy and what? Sorry.
My book, which you cited, is about
action.
Yeah, so it's about the farmer in Japan and his relations with the land, or the dam operators in the Colorado River that you mentioned.
Well, sorry.
So, right, I mean, that's not about democracy. And maybe something's missing from your account of Stafford Beer in that respect. He's kind of, well, yeah, certainly performative relations with non-humans.
If I understand you well, democracy is has a political history, whereas these examples like the ex nia in Rome or the erosion in Japan or the Colorado River imply an intervention of the people that are not necessarily concerned with the establishment. This is what you mean?
No, I mean, it's about the agency of rivers and the soil and sparrows.
Exactly. See, well, democracy here should be redefined as including this action with nature, let's say. Because my problem is, who are the people today? Who are the people today? You know, we in Italian we have popolo, but we don't use it anymore because popolo reminds of maybe fascism. And today, who are the people? We don't have the workers or one social class. We don't have a cultural hegemony, for instance, but we have here and there these spots in which contingent actions are taken with nature, using your lexicon, with nature. So if this is a sign of democracy, I would say it is a sign of democracy on condition that we modify the definition of democracy. Because do we live in democracies? What kind of democracies are they? If the artificial takes over and imposes surreptitiously its algedonic preferences.
Okay, great. So maybe the question is, what do you mean by democracy?
I don't know. I don't know what democracy is. Historically speaking, from Athens on, democracy is the power of the people. Okay?
Right.
So the demos is not just a multitude, as I think Paolo Virno distinguished, but it is a compact demos that is able to gather in the square, vote, make elections, and this was Athens, and this freely discuss about the next day, what to do for the state. This was already Arendt's retrieval of this ancient model, one of the great viable system model. Today, do we have an equivalent of that? I don't see any democracy. But at the same time, if I say something against Meloni, I don't go to jail. Okay, so we must consider this enormous difference. Does it mean that democracy exists, or does it mean that democracy may exist in the making? Is it a task? Maybe it's still a task, but on condition that we redefine demos, that we redefine the people. People cannot only mean human beings. As such, we are simply powerless. Human beings plus the heuristic work that we make with the algorithms and not against the algorithms. Can we say that?
Yeah. It sounds like you have a very humanistic concept of democracy, which
we have
seems to include
we have to forget
basically about people, right?
Exactly, but humanism made so many damages. I don't think that we can go back to humanism.
I would like to continue the question from Andy, because I'm also very, very interested by the way that you plot the problems with democracy. And I myself, as you can imagine, I'm really suffering with the way that the technology has evolved and the way that all this dream that Stafford had in Chile when he was doing the CyberSync project, and the graph that you presented is my favorite one from the whole CyberSync project, when he tries to connect the people with the government. And then you had a government that was wanting to listen to the people. You have a technology that was enormously rudimentary, and it was possible to dream that the president would ask a question or make a comment, and people, or a majority of people, or a large number of people, will push a button or do something, and then the government will hear the voice of the people. No, in that condition, it was like a dream, and it was absolutely fascinating. And you were thinking it was like in the agoras in Greece, and people will be just wanting to talk, and people will be expressing, and their voices will be heard. And that's what we've lost with this one in this moment. I mean, like 10 years ago, when we wrote our first book with John, we were still talking about democracy and thinking about the VSM and how cybernetics could create a world in which democracy will be much more generalized. And I was very naively thinking that with social media, we will have the right technology so that the will of the people will be the one that will be empowered. And people have so much common sense that the majority of the people with common sense will be the one dominating all the regimes and the authoritarians and all that. And I'm totally disappointed. And I sort of thinking how naive I was, thinking that that was going to happen. What happened was exactly the opposite, no? And I think that the problem that you touched very clearly is the problem that the regime, that the technology, the big corporations, the AI, the Apples, the Facebook and all that, those are the ones that are in control of our social media. And those, it is their interest, the ones that are manipulating the way that social media acts. And in some way, they are overriding the will and the desire of the majority. So we are in a situation that is not just the technology, it's the political manipulation of the technology, or even worse, the economic manipulation of the technology, because it's the owners of this media, the ones that are managing to impose, to make sure that it is their voices that are heard, and their way of thinking, that is their narratives that are completely widespread and that are sort of obscuring the consciousness that I was expecting that will emerge. Yeah. And this is a big dilemma that I have not a clue how we as human beings can't do something in this moment to counteract this situation. I don't know. But I feel very impotent that the technology that we have created and the science that we have created doesn't seem to be good enough to find a solution to restore any idea of real democracy. Yeah. And I guess that there are still possibilities of dreaming, like citizens' assemblies, and I mean, like Stafford with the World's Integrity Project, when he was saying, okay, let's convoke all the citizens in the world and let's try to put everything together to design the principles of a world constitution. And then between all of us, we will be able to say, everybody has to act according to these basic rules of the game, these basic principles. That was a brilliant idea. But again, in this moment, we have the technology, we have the science, and we don't. What we have is more and more authoritarian regimes, more and more people convinced of these narratives, and less possibilities that there is any way to translate this common sense into making democracy alive again. Yes, Paul.
It is interesting. So you explicitly thought that the social media would be a new instrument for a new viable system. This is, I never thought of it.
I was expecting that, because I thought, I mean, like in your image of the CyberSyn project, I thought that the social media will be an opportunity for the majority of the people to express their view. And I do think that intrinsically human beings are sensible, intelligent, generous, understanding, and all sorts of things that we don't seem to be demonstrating to be in this moment.
No, but if we reason, not by chance, beer was implemented in a revolutionary moment, in a revolutionary state. So a revolution leaves such an empty space that could be filled. Now all the space, globally speaking, is already filled. So how to interrupt this flow of information that is guided top down? I'm not so negative or disappointed because of this reverse mentoring. Okay, why don't we ask our students, our children, our grandchildren? They are not pessimistic because they didn't live any past. They don't have a past. Their future is longer than their past. They may be cynical. They may be cynical because they say, I must study business, which is another illusion. But at the same time, we might listen to them and see how this social media might be deviated somehow. Okay, so the social media are relatively recent. So they might branch off in some myriad of small communities that can reach some kind of common view of things. I'm not so negative. We only have to consider their limit of patience. That is, they can be patient and cynical, but to a certain extent, because they're getting poorer and poorer. So either their economic status or their mental status will require some kind of retroaction.
Yes, Paul.
I've always wanted to create conditions in which experiments could be done, implementing, not just conceptually, alternatives to the way the current algorithms go. So if the platform companies have a neural net that maximizes engagement, which equals profit for them because attention equals profit, what alternative algorithms, heuristics, I prefer, could be implemented as experiments? Yes, absolutely, in concert, in collaboration with new generations. But although individuals now, and more with generative AI helping you do the coding, which seems to be viable and exciting, nonetheless, I don't see the attraction to young people or people of any age to compete with Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And my claim would be they don't have to compete directly, but if there were little moments of alternatives that could be experimented with, then perhaps in a perfect idealistic world, I share Angela's idealism for what might have been, then maybe some will arise and attract the people who wish to engage in what would be a genuinely democratic voice of the people situation.
But that would be a fascinating project for your new cybernetic laboratory, isn't it? Like
Absolutely.
reverse mentoring, having young people that by
Absolutely.
reverse mentoring show us how to do
Absolutely.
experiments to discover these alternative ways of doing it.
This is one of the ideas, one of the projects. As it turns out, the job market is horrendous for people who are coming out of Carnegie Mellon, who have skills in doing coding and marketing and all of these other things. So one fantasy would be to get them into projects that, although are not paid, might occupy their minds and their hands, and we might accumulate some momentum in these directions and make some alternatives. I need an economist. Does anyone know an economist? I don't know how to set up the interactions. I think the problem is, forgive a slight rant here, essentially everything you do on social media is free of cost. Yes, your time, but there's no economy involved. I don't have to pay 50 cents in order to say to that guy over there, you're an asshole, stop, right? Or you're wrong, right? And the degradation of the interactions in almost any thread on any system, except maybe LinkedIn, which here in America is professional. But any system that has a threaded conversation gets reduced to this horrible back and forth in which hate is spewed freely because there is no cost. So if you know of an economist, send them our way to the Laboratory of Cybernetics, and we will try to set up something where I can't say anything without incurring some cost, which would cause me to hesitate. So anyway, what are the ideas we need to create a new platform which has the qualities that we seek? I can't on my own think of what all of those are, nor could I implement them if I could think of them. So I would love a critical conversation about these things across the generations. This is one of the dreams here.
Well, why new platforms? You know, there are so many platforms that could be used for alternative reasons. Once they feel engaged in a project.
As long as we can code inside them, as long as we can change what gets shown next based on some heuristic thing. And there are platforms that allow that, but it ain't Facebook because I can't change the heuristic.
John.
Yeah, I think there are things happening that are very, very encouraging in this area, and we were involved with the people doing DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, which is like complex adaptive systems, another description of the viable system model. I mean, it's they're all coming, they're all sort of heading towards where Stafford got to, but of course Stafford was way ahead. And it seems possible that these things will develop. I think the overriding issue for me is scale and time, that these things are building up very, very slowly. And we really don't have that much time left to change the society because of all the climate issues and this whole thing. If we had another 100 years or so to let these things develop, and I've worked in cooperatives all my life. There are more cooperatives setting up now than there have been for a long time because they're non-exploitative. Every other business model is exploitative. You hire people to make profit for the people who set it up and for the shareholders. And when I got involved in co-ops in the 70s, we were quite convinced that by the year 2000, there wouldn't be many ordinary companies left. Everybody would be working in co-ops. And of course, I was a little optimistic at the time. So I think there are these things that are developing and lots of great ideas. And I mean, I don't know if you read Jeremy Rifkin, but he's wildly optimistic about the change from the capitalist society, and a number of people are saying you can look at what's happening in history at the moment, and it's a transition between competitive hierarchies and collaborative networks. And that's kind of like a huge, like a cosmic overview of what's happening in society. And you can see it all over the place. But nevertheless, you look at the last election in America, you look at the Citizens United bill, you look at all the stuff happening, all the governments that are turning to the right at the moment. And again, there are these two really sort of powerful forces interacting, and how, and this is Brunella's old world and new world, and old paradigm and new paradigm, and how you encourage the shift to the new one is the issue. And there are lots of answers, but I don't know any of them that are going to be fast enough to really work.
Thank you, John. Elena.
Yeah, muted, Elena.
I got it. Thank you for a very engaging talk. And I'm looking forward to going through the PowerPoint. But I wanted to mention one thing. Stafford's viable system model is based on the human body, where the organs don't compete with each other and the whole body acts kind of in concert. Maybe directing some more resources in one direction than another to meet a specific need, like digestion, for instance. But that seems to be so difficult to extend out from the individual body past very small groups, which do seem to often operate with an idea of the collective good. And it seems to me that the late stage capitalism has gone, right off the deep end in the other direction, with financializing just about everything they can get their hands on and rent seeking at every opportunity. And how can that idea of a viable system model, or a viable system in total, cannot be so exploitive? It cannot behave like a cancer. And I'm, another one of the people that have hopes for the new technology, and I'm looking kind of with horror at the local, some of the local politics around the world that seems to be trying its best to go back to, like medieval times.
Thank you.
I don't think so. I don't think it's good to go back to medieval times. No, but you're perfectly right. The first victim of this transition are the bodies, physical bodies. In this moment, our conversation is not guided by bodies. However, I move my hands, but the body language is not there. We are flattened. But so much is lost whenever we have a technological transition. So we have to cope with it. Let's imagine the natives that when they are 1 year old already hold a cell phone, are able to use it They're natives that do not make a tragedy or a drama out of it. Let's accept that the role of our bodies is changing, which has the enormous advantage of the global interconnection. If we want to have a small viable system models, Johnny said they work if they're small, but let's imagine global viable system model, global systems that are small, but myriads of them, in which bodies play a very limited role, but we have to accept it, but can, in one way or the other, we are not sure about that, but heuristically try to insert disturbances in the highly unstable world that we face. I'm trying to make it positive and future. Without, because if we criticize technologies too much, I think it's useless, because AI is already here, already is with us. Young people, natives, and do not make a fuss, do not make a problem out of it. Let's accept it, because there are also so many advantages. This is what I mean. If we think of medicine, if we think of what happened in these last years with the vaccination, I don't know, we have plenty of examples. Surveillance, and we complain about surveillance, but the surveillance may also be a way to protect, especially women and children, because if they are surveyed, they can be freer to walk the streets, which are not safe.
Mm-hmm.
Are not safe because of this global motion of the people all around the world.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Just a final comment. I really like your emphasis on reverse mentoring, and I do agree that perhaps we need to learn more from the young generation, because the young generation has grown with these technologies, and they are much more critical than us in finding out, filtering out, and choosing what to believe than we are. So in that respect, there is a kind of, I mean, there is a lot of wisdom in the way that they are growing up with technologies, and it will be really interesting to really do these experiments. Paul, if you go ahead with this idea, call us, because I want to be part of this experiment. I would love to be part, and I think that is something really for collaboration between all our cybernetic societies. Is a topic that we should take very seriously. I mean, if we only do that project before we go away, that would be a really important thing to do. Really nice.
We might think of a network of small experimental communities that link the cybernetic societies, or like something smaller like my collective. I think it could be done.
Let's talk about that outside the context of this webinar. Let's have another meeting to invent a project like that, because I think we should start doing things like this. It's really good. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I remember when we were working with Brian at the Eco Village, and after months and months and months of talking VSM, he said, "All I do now is talk metasystems. That's all I do. That's all I talk about." And the next level up and the next level, and of course they're all collaborative, because it's a system 3, and viability requires collaboration. Anyway.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Brunella, and thank you all for being with us.
Thank you, everyone. And
yeah, thank you, Brunella. That was really great.
And apologies again for the difficult start of this meeting.
It was worth the wait.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful stuff.